Just give a warm welcome.
Thank you. Just a really quick correction.
Yes.
At UWI, I coordinate the Cultural and Creative Industry Bachelors. I teach Masters and PhD, but I coordinate the Bachelors.
Okay. Thank you very much.
No, man, no problem.
That's a very important intellectual honesty. Yes. Thank you. So here we are at Coffee, Tea, and Sovereignty. I would like us to begin by walking through what some of those things mean.
Okay.
When we talk about decolonization, what exactly are we talking about?
All right. Decolonization is the process of moving away from, of rejecting, and actually making a practical movement away from the ideas of colonialism and colonization. And when we talk about decolonization, sometimes we think it's this big kind of concept that's up in our heads, and we're making a grand statement, but it's really a very granular process of making a decision that these are some of the ideas that don't work for us, that have not worked for us, that are grounded in issues of subordination, that are grounded in issues of an unclear identity, that are grounded in issues of delegitimization. And decolonization is therefore the process of actively moving towards negating those ideas.
Now, hear my confusion now, Dr. Deborah, before you continue. I'm understanding that a process has not been complete.
Absolutely.
But we talk about post-colonial. So that tell me the process complete.
And there's a lot of nuance in these issues. And so I always say these definitions, these words, these terms are applied by people. We have to live the changes, and we have to be clear about those lived changes. So post-colonial, and my aunt in Australia, professor in Australia, always tells me, post-colonial is not a temporal issue. It's not about time. It is a conceptual issue. It's an issue of advancing beyond a colonial mindset. Yeah? And so that's where
I hear Marcus Garvey. I hear Marcus Garvey saying emancipate yourselves
from mental slavery. And so post is not about it was today and it isn't tomorrow. It's a process, an ongoing process of determining that this is not optimal for us. And so we now need to make optimal decisions. Now
let us look at some of the things that might be important in that process. If I don't know I'm ill, I can't seek help.
Absolutely.
So who drives the process, or what drives the process of education that gives me the signpost? I can look at someone and say, we think differently. Why we think differently? Why we're not in the same part of the process? And what can I learn? What are some of the signposts?
So we have this strange kind of notion that thinking can yam. You can't eat it, you can't hold it, you can't feel it, you can't touch it. And therefore, it's not of necessity or value. But I'm very, very clear that it is the thinking that has to drive the doing. And we have to get back to a place of intellectual honesty where we recognize that it is our thought processes that is going to drive what we require, this post-colonial, decolonial reality. And I'm not talking about university thinking, and I'm not even talking about making the difference between thinking on the street and thinking, in institutions. I'm just saying that we need to know, we need to put a premium on thought. We need to put a premium on working through some of these issues. But I wanted to make one more point in terms of the decolonial construct. In my book, I wrote about a concept that I call D2K, Decolonization 2.0. And it was really kind of geared towards those individuals, those younger individuals who kind of hear the words, who will hear the lecture. We're going to talk about decolonization, and it put them off. They're like, oh my God, are we really going to talk about this again? What is it? Why these people don't stop? They're so grounded in the past. This is not about me. I am into... And they absolutely reject it. But I want to say to them that this issue of decolonization 2.0 is always grounded in technology. We're in a digital age. So it has to be grounded in the notion that we are here and we have to make decisions in the here and now that's going to impact the future. That's going to impact the present, which is a digital, which is a different space to what it was in the 1970s, when decolonization was another thing. It's now another thing. Yeah? And so it has to advance with the time, but it is the thinking that certain things are not good enough, thinking that disdain over our lives is not good enough.
And this is where I want us to pay some attention, because as you spoke about the implications and perhaps the centrality of the digital age, I went back to Paul Bogle. And for Paul Bogle, decolonization was about building institutions that reflect us.
Absolutely.
We have entered a digital space where decolonization, even if we don't use that word, is about material things.
Okay.
It's about how me model pa me matey. It's about the size of my house. It's about the cost of my car. I can take that into a digital space and create wonderful things around it. But my mindset about who I am and my place in relationship to where I live and my relationship with other human beings has not changed.
But I also want to say to you that I spoke a little yesterday about neoliberalism and the impact of neoliberalism. And I want to say that we didn't get here kind of by accident. We just didn't happen upon these perspectives and ideas. This has been a 50-year process of change. This has been a process of conditioning too. And that takes us back to colonization. And it's a process of conditioning that has been very deliberate. It's economic. It emerged with this notion of globalization. And essentially what happened is that an ideology emerged, this neoliberal ideology emerged, that took governments off the hook. And it said everybody now needs every tub have to turn up on them own bottom. Everybody go and become an entrepreneur. Everybody go and become an individual. The issues of community don't matter. The issues of collective bargaining are passé. Let's now, everybody now needs to kind of move forward. Institutions don't matter. Become an individual and sort yourself out. And with that came this notion of, I need this. I must have that. I need to do this. I need to look like that. Yeah? So I need a, and I need a...
And so Rex Nettleford was right when he described globalization as old obscenities in new clothes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you see, the thing about it is that we also need to recognize that where we are in the here and now, there's no reversing it like that. So it has to be a thought process, a process of consciousness, a process of kind of reviving in people that spirit of pride, as basic as that. And I get goosebumps when I say it.
And yet there is a suggestion that the process and the outcomes are not necessarily the same universally. I'm talking now about the concepts of the global north and the global south and the implications of all of that for where we live and what these concepts mean. You spoke about the global south last night. What on earth is the global south?
Okay.
A new point on the east-west.
So the world has, for a while been divided into areas, economic areas, development related areas. So you would have had third world and the first world. So at one point you would have had developing countries and developed countries. You have small island developing states and small states and emerging economies, and all of these terms have emerged. The global south is really the politically correct, the newest phase of that kind of dividing of the world, and it speaks to those countries that are not advanced industrial countries. It is, and you have different elements within the global south. So you have emerging economies. So BRICS would be a part of the global south, but they would not be small states or small island
Can we
developing
just say what
states.
BRICS is for
So
people
BRICS is that organization of states that now includes more people, but started with Brazil, Russia, India, South America,
South Africa.
China and South Africa.
Yes.
China and South Africa, right? So those countries all came together and decided that the world economic order was not sufficient. It was a decolonial movement.
So they were challenging G7.
It was that's a great yes. That's a great example of decolonization in action. They came together and they said, no. This World Economic Forum thing and the Bretton Woods movement and the Washington Consensus that told us, that led to neoliberalism, that told us that we have to formulate our economies in this sort of way, don't work. It don't fit. It doesn't fit.
Can you express a bit how these different kinds of divisions lead us in Jamaica, for example, to be schizophrenic? Because when they're ready, we're a small developing state that needs certain kinds of assistance. And when them ready, then put us into the developed world and turn them back upon we.
Right, and say that we need to live up to these standards that they have set. But the schizophrenia goes further than that. Because in our heads, we are operating not at the level of a small island developing state. And in our bodies of expression,
we are the next superpower.
We are the superpower. We are all superheroes. And each individual artist and each conglomerate of artists and sports people and thinkers, it's creating...
Let's stay with that.
Yeah.
Let's stay with the role of the creative community in this superpower image of Jamaica on the global stage.
Well, it is the creative community, largely, not only, but largely, that has created that image for Jamaica.
Give us some examples, because this generation sometimes believe that this thing only happened since... I try my best to be respectful now, because recently on a radio station I heard Beanie Man and Beanie Man and Popcorn being described as the royalty of the music. And me say, all right then, me understand a different thing from royalty. So
the royal family is thousands of years old. So this may be the new generation of royalty.
And so there is a generation that doesn't understand that they are building on something and they are not the foundation. So we don't talk about Millie Small, and we don't talk about Desmond Decker and the Aces and Hopeton Lewis, and we don't know the foundations that they have laid long before the harder they come, and we stepped out on
Absolutely.
that. And even when we talk about Usain Bolt, we're on Arthur Wint Drive. We don't know about Arthur Wint and Leng and the others of them.
But even more than knowing who the people were and what they did, we need to be instilling, sharing, engendering, encouraging the notion that the quest of that knowledge is important to me as a young person. If a young person does not see the value in that knowledge, they will not seek it. They will not share in it.
So we spoke about education as a mechanism for engendering that quest. And you said that we don't necessarily mean university education. I want to come back to that in a little while. Because a second mechanism might be at the level of the political leadership and the decisions they take on our behalf. Can I just say how upset I have been that right across from Devon House, that you have to search for the marker, is a food enterprise that we shall give no free advertisement on this program, in this forum, in this institution, that you can't help but see it. And unless you know the history and the value of Devon House and that corner, you will grow up with that food enterprise as your cultural marker.
I never thought of it that way. I never thought about it that way, but it is significant. I made the point this morning in a post that one of the things about culture is that it's not just about the things that we see, feel, hear, do, those tangible things. It's about what things mean. And some of the actions that we take, we not only have to kind of work out, okay, so I did this or I didn't do that, but what does it mean that I did it? Or what does it mean that I didn't do that? There is significance in that. And there's empirical significance in that. You can measure it. What did this person mean by doing or not doing? And so it's really important. The decisions that are made. You talk about governance. There, two things have come up this week that really kind of point to this issue: the Vale Royal issue, the issue of the absolute degradation of Vale Royal.
I want to do a check to see how many people know what. Yes.
In my class, I did the check, and 100% of 20 did not know what Vale Royal was. That's a whole other issue, right? And why it's significant to examine the issue of its degradation.
And the importance of monuments and memorializing.
Absolutely. But I was saying that's one issue. The other, that's heritage. The other issue has been the issue of the closing down of Chronix's show early, and that's a popular culture issue. And both of them are content for me. Beyond that is the meaning of both of those issues. It speaks to neglect. It speaks to an issue of contempt. That's what it speaks to. These are issues that have been long-standing, prevailing issues. I'm not talking about just one administration. I'm talking going back 50 years. These are all issues that have already emerged. What is it beyond us as a people to solve these problems?
There is a theorist, and I'm sorry, his name has escaped me now, that has a concept called a wicked problem. A wicked problem is a problem where when you solve a piece of it, you find another piece you have to solve, another piece you have to solve. Because these people who we are holding to high standards of governance grew up in this society. And so one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, to what extent have we, the so-called ordinary people, neglected to curate who we are, what represents us, and how we make meaning of that representation?
Absolutely. And it's really a question that we all need to be asking of ourselves. What have I done? And I think that's what I was saying yesterday when I spoke about the three women who came to mind, that they not only sat on the veranda and tittered, they did that too. But each one of them, they did something else.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that in a little while, Miss Debs, because there was something else you said which triggered another thought. Here we are as a global superpower. Is that a tautology? Global. But we are going with it because I saw Jamaicans there. We're pretty and we're nice. So we're a global superpower. Besides being heard, what is the impact of the content that we are releasing on the global stage?
You mean now?
I mean now. But do you want to compare it to then?
No. I suppose the fact that the other sets of global superpowers and the emergence of even an African musical superpower beyond our local superpower of 50 years, and the hue and cry that has brought about. How can we be talking about Afrobeats when reggae has been around for so long and so on? It's a shame. But I think that things happen as they do, literally, and so they.
But we never quarrel when reggae did take over Africa. It did sweet way. Diminishing economically, diminishing in terms of its meaning. But I mean to say that, as they say in Barbados, it ain't named Broad Street for nothing. And if we understood and curated our relationship with the continent and our cultural heritage and how we could make Bob Marley's words true, Africa awaits her creators, then we wouldn't have a problem with the global image of Afrobeats.
From a decolonial perspective, if we were to recognize that we are actually a part of the 6th region of Africa,
absolutely,
then there would be no need for this
recognize
discussion.
Us as that, but part of the colonial mentality, they divide and rule and separate you from yourself. All right, so that's just a broad brush of some of the terms we need to understand and some of the context within which we're placed. Let's go to last night.
Okay.
Because you spoke about the 3 women. And last night we were looking at democracy and decolonization, exploring gender and creative endeavor. And you spoke about the general context, but you also exampled 3 women. Just tell us briefly, remind us who those 3 women were and why you chose them.
Those 3 women were my grandmother. Her name was Kathleen Bond Hickling, and she was a teacher of music for 70 years. Up until her deathbed, she was still teaching chromatic scales. The second was Miss Lou, but not from the perspective that we always study Miss Lou, from the perspective of her advocacy and her agency, her political advocacy and agency. And the third was a woman called Gloria Lanneman, who I hope the drama students know because of her contribution in terms of the number of scripts that she wrote and her activities within media and theater in particular. And I spoke about them because they were they're part of the middle class. And I remember my grandmother used to have these soirees on Connolly Avenue, 23 Connolly Avenue. And they used to laugh and drink and eat, and there was a lot of levity. And this was an artistic group of Jamaicans, and they were an elite group. Let's be clear about it. And we need to stop being afraid of talking about these things. It existed and it still exists. Some of the lines are blurred. Some of the things have changed. Some of the categories don't exist anymore and have become new things. But this was an elite group of thespians who gathered at different houses at different times for events. But the point I was trying to make really clearly is amongst them, while they laughed and wined and dined, they were developing a number of revolutionary concepts. Those concepts were coming out in theater. Those concepts came out through the NDTC, because many of them were dancers, many of them were choreographers. Those concepts came out in the art world. Norman Ray, David Boxer, those people who were a part of that group. And they did things. So it wasn't just about tittering. It wasn't about eating big fish out of a big yaba at Norman Ray House on New Year's Eve, every Christmas Eve. Yeah, it was about making a difference and finding something that they could do, either as individuals or the formation of organizations, because many of them did that. Coming out of these organizations, came major ideas, came advocacy. They had access to radio. They were on radio and television. Yeah, so they were writing radio dramas that were telling the stories about real people and real problems. Miss Lou was going into the hills and vales of the entire country, and she was not only taking information to them of smadification, she was taking information out of the communities to say, this is us. And she wrote it into her scripts. Gloria Lanneman did the same. And they all were political activists. And it was really a note to say that we've become really comfortable in this middle classness that many of us live. And there are notions of middle class. And to also make the point that middle class don't mean that things weren't hard. It didn't mean that people weren't kind of going through their own suffering. And it doesn't, Stuart Hall talks about the essentialization of difference. It's not about a comparison. It is about an entire society that lived a reality within a colonial and decolonizing space in which people were doing the best they could. Yeah?
I'd like to use this last intervention of yours to take us back to something you said earlier about the challenges of the digital age. So I might take a little while to explain what I mean. When you talk about that time and those women, which I'm emphasizing because I want to come back to where the men them did there, right?
They were there too.
About that time and the women who met on their verandas, there was a unity. There was a support and love in the artistic community. We can't talk about Rex Nettleford and not talk about Marjorie Wiley, and vice versa. Who, when she was 16 years old, Rex take a chance on her that she could act. Am I correct, Marlon? That she could actually lead the singers, the NDTC singers, Easton Lee up there, the whole of them up there, upper regardless, and they looked forward, from my understanding, to being in a space where they could support one another as human beings and therefore support their artistic output.
They showed up.
They showed up. Now, I watched the Bob Marley One Love movie, and many things about it stay with me for all kinds of reasons. You see, when Bob was going to write Exodus, him bring everybody together. And him say, I have something in me head. Him come in like me, him autistic. So him expect you can see when I'm head. I have something in me head. It goes so. Seeko, play it for me. And Seeko, him say, I know that in me head. And Seeko, try again. And him say, yes, at that we are going out. And him call upon somebody else. Teamwork. And then Garrick come in now with the initial cover for the Exodus, and the team discussed it. In 2024, me one Ghana studio.
Well, yeah. No, I stay home in studio.
All right.
Because it's right there.
What are some of the, and I now want to use an adjective, the negative implications of that for the collective thinking that will help us to understand whether we're still colonized, how we need to be decolonized, what sovereignty mean, and whether I can find an example, a living example that I can draw inspiration from.
Okay, let me ask a question. How many people in here are students? Here at Edna, one.
No man, see a couple more hands.
Two. I only see two hands. I rest my case.
No, don't rest the case. Explain the case. What is the case?
There are two people here. That's not to say that there are not 50 online. But what that means, and we were talking about it earlier, there's an energy that is required in showing up. There's an energy, and I guess this is something that I learned from my father. When you put people in a circle and they bring their energy into the room and into the circle, that energy becomes a part of the whole group. It can't escape. Yeah? So there is an issue of centralization and decentralization. Every individual is in their room on an individual device. That goes back again to the same neoliberal thinking. Yeah? But it's not, and that of itself is causing the absence of that cohesion, because they haven't showed up. And so the negative is really about an energy of cohesion. And so with the digitization, I went to the States for the first time since COVID last year, about May. And if you step out of the plane, you have to use a credit card to do everything. You can't call a taxi without a credit card. You can't go into a restaurant without a credit card. And it has completely dehumanized the interactions of people. Banking. Let me tell you a thing about banking. There was a time in banking where there were shades of gray, and that was good and bad. But now, either you have $100 in your bank account or you don't. And if you don't, you can't do anything. I want you to think about that. There's no notion of a compromise or a discussion or a negotiation or meeting an issue when life's challenges, kind of. And when you call, you get a robot. Either a human robot who has a script, or a real robot that has a script programmed. Yeah? And so this notion of humanity, we really need to think about it, what it means in digitization and digitalization, because it's important for efficiency. So I asked the question. I went to a show recently and I asked my students the question, has efficiency, it was about art and artistry. I saw two very good performers, international performers, perform. And they both had wonderful sets, cue to cue, musicians on it. They know exactly what is happening. Everything is, in sync. The dancer know when to raise left foot, right foot, right? Everything. But in here, and these are people I'd seen perform. The connection for me, and I've been
I hear the word soulless. That sometimes you look at a dance piece and it is technically absolutely sound.
Yeah, man.
But you can pick the dancer out who is dancing with spirit.
Absolutely.
Or with their soul.
Absolutely. And I had to say, and there was another story, and it's the same thing. It's about the notion of efficiency and and soul, I suppose. It's a dialectic, the material dialectic. You have a show that has sold itself over 50 years on the economic. Oh goodness, the word is eluding me at the moment. Anyhow, the fact that you have soup vendors and everybody within the ecosystem will gain economic traction. And now you've made that show so efficient that cadre of the ecosystem is moved a mile down the road and away from the gate multiplier, the economic multiplier. That's whenever you talk about, people have been talking about cultural and creative industries for many years. That's the argument. The multiplier means that the entire ecosystem is going to benefit.
So the traits of individualism and me for myself are also multiplied. I want to ask you two more questions, and then I'll throw the floor open for your intervention. You picked 3 women last night. You picked 3 largely middle class women. And You never talk about the man them and their representation of a need to decolonize pan them little snow cone. Them still make snow cone or peanut cart. You see, you go down an inner city, whatever that means, street, and you have to see at least one mural with 3 men on it. Bob Marley, Haile Selassie, and Marcus Garvey. And then them put up who gone too soon. So they have their own heroes. We see that. So you didn't talk about that. And I want you to talk about that. And then you talk about these women being on the veranda. And one of the things I think we know, and perhaps we don't know it, but we assume it, is that the boys' club is the most powerful, most organized club in Jamaica. Where are the men? Where did the Huey and the Parbo sings?
Wow.
Where did they meet? Them go to a bar, them go play a golf.
That's
What's their
interesting.
equivalent?
That's interesting, and that requires research. Actually,
That's what
it
I
does
said I would
require.
surprise
Yes, okay, but
with.
it's. But there is an answer to the question. There were different groupings of men, and there were men who were present at some of these soirees. In fact, some of the men hosted some of these soirees. Those in the artistic community, they were a part of that process, but there were other men. Mr. Kovali, who was a metronome. My grandfather was the accountant. He was a civil servant, but he kept the books for the school. And the house couldn't stand up if he didn't do that, because she's very happily teaching music from 6 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. She's not looking left or right? Except for the soirees. But he was tone deaf. And he completely kept the thing going. And so there were those men. There was Mr. Miller, Lois Kelly Miller's husband. Quiet. Not a word in English.
I'm so happy that you're talking about the role of men behind the women.
The support
we
systems.
look at Louise Bennett and we see
Absolutely.
Dwight Wiley.
Absolutely.
And we see Easton Lee. And we see our bishop. And we see our husband who was a master impresario. And so on and so on and so forth. And we look at Una Morrison. And we not see
thought of her too.
Oh wow. And we not see no man round her.
But you see, that's also a part of the consciousness that we need to be thinking through. It's a part of the decolonization, because we now need to be thinking about how we're positioning these issues, these gender issues, going forward. So I also made the point that when I was president of Women in Film and Television, I had to represent the organization at the International Forum of Presidents. And all of the women them, I talk about how they're being marginalized and they're not getting the same amount of money and they're not getting the decent, they're not getting the gender and so on and so forth, which is important. But when I stood up, I could say that the people who are at the helm of the film sector in Jamaica are all women. All. There are many male directors. But if you think of the individuals who are the movers and shakers of the film sector in Jamaica, they're women.
That's very interesting, because you also spoke about the balance.
Yes.
And we understood balance of power. And one of the questions that arise, and we won't address it now because we promised to open the floor, is could we, if men were not around? And so I think of some of the important men whose legacies are being maintained. Martin Luther King, Coretta Scott King. Would we know about him if she never do what she do? Would Bob Marley's legacy be Bob Marley's legacy if there was not give her our title, a Queen Rita Marley? So that all of that, I think we need to consider as we consider the gender roles. Where was discussing again? Exploring gender and creative endeavor and how that propels us to sovereignty and decolonization.
I must tell you something. I grappled with that issue, and I said, I'm not gonna mention it, but I'll say it here because this is Spirit Move moment. I'm not a feminist. I'm a reluctant feminist. There's some things about feminism that I agree with, and some things about disparities and inequality that must be addressed. But in all spheres, the issues of inclusion and equality is important. But you see, this issue of support, I got married late, and I have come to recognize that it's not even a financial issue. That issue of Lois and Miss Miller, of Mr. and Mrs. Coverley, Miss and Mrs. Hicklin, all of them, it's because there was that support, and it's important. And so we have to think about the balance. We have, and
Can I add a descriptor?
And
Respectful support.
respectful
So
support.
that so that this could change at any time. It could be that, it could be this.
Yeah.
And there wasn't any one dominant figure all the time.
And as the gender lines blur, it's about partnership, whatever that looks like. It's about creating supportive partnerships. But you know what that means? You gotta show up.
You have to show up. You know, Albertine Susulu was allowed one visit each year when Walter was in prison. And she make her own money, you know. But she also made a list that she not go spend the money until she have that one visit with Walter. It's in the book by Eleanor Susulu, Freedom in Our Time. And she going go and she going say, I have this money and these are the things that we need to do. How do you suggest that we spend it?
Yes.
And it wasn't because she felt inferior to him or was dependent on him. She wanted him to know that he was still part of the family.
Absolutely.
And therefore part of the decision-making
Absolutely.
process.
Absolutely, it's so important, and actually, you know, it's kind of like in research we talk about units of analysis. That's where it starts. That's the kernel, that ability to be able to say, I am making a decision, or can we make a decision together? And then we're talking about a larger group, a third person, a fourth person, a fifth person, a sixth person, so that we don't have to chop up each other when a decision is made and we don't agree, right? Because that's exactly what's happening. We're not learning to negotiate with each other. We're not learning to have a conversation or make decisions together.
So you've raised negotiation as an important part of power brokering.
Absolutely.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, it's your turn. How shall we handle this in terms of Yakub has the microphone and the camera will pick up the speaker, or she must stand and face the camera, Sophie. After Sophie, principal, please. Yes, go ahead, Sophie.
Morning, everyone. Morning, Dr. Hicklin Gordon. Thank you so much for your presentation yesterday. I continue to be just in awe of everything that's being said because it resonates so much with me. But my question, and there was so much that was said this morning, I feel like the whole thing could be like seminars upon seminars, a whole conference. But to touch on the technology aspect and the whole issue of, you know, how many students are here and so forth, I wanted to know, because that's a concern of mine, are we doing the same thing that we may have experienced when we were younger? So I find myself nowadays listening to certain contemporary music, popular culture, and being like, oh my gosh, 90s dancehall, 2000 dancehall, young people don't know music. And then I stop myself and I go, that's what my parents used to say. So
That's a very good
in
question.
essence, I keep wondering if we are missing the connecting with them. How do we then engage them for them to see the necessity to be present here or even online? We're streaming, but is there an aspect of the communication happening online? Is there a moderator online specifically challenging, you know?
Right.
So it's kind of like we can observe that there is a bit of like, you know, disparity and
Disconnect.
nonchalance
Yeah.
and disconnect. But we see the importance of it. But saying that it is so important and you guys don't know is still not appealing to them. Because as far as they're concerned, that's back in the day. You know, they talk about back in the day. How do we reach them and engender and encourage the dialogue?
It's a brilliant question. You know, the other thing we need to recognize too is that in those communities there are protocols, and even online the conversations are happening. They are communicating. That's their means of communicating. So it's really about, you're absolutely right, about finding a way to communicate the necessity of balance. Yeah? That there's sometimes that you have to turn up. So there's sometimes you have to come to class. And let me tell you why. Because your teacher needs to see you learning. And you need to be responding to that teacher, because it's your response that is the insurance that you have learned something. And they need to see it in your eyes. They don't just need to hear you. I asked, and when I knew that I had lost, or some things were lost, is at the end of a course, an online course, I asked a question and I framed it deliberately. The question was, in your opinion, what resonated with you about this course? Going around the room. Miss, I'm going to have to research it and come back. No. What resonated with you? What you feel, think, know, understand? No. Well, come back to me, miss. I'll tell you in a bit. And so there has to be that connection. But it's really about communicating the importance of the connection, as opposed to in a kind of didactic manner and a whip. Yeah, because that's another colonialism now, you know. Because we're saying to them, you know, you must do it this way, and it's a resistance. Or to use up the technology that exists, which is what we're doing at the moment, so people are hearing. But there also needs to be structure and rules in which individuals know that there are times that you have to show up.
Yeah.
You can't rehearse from your bedroom. You can't, you know, I mean, people did it during COVID. Everybody stand up in front of the camera, left foot, right foot, up, down, yeah? But we know what the issues are, but it's really about maybe in a participatory way saying to those individuals that we're trying to say, guys, you need to show up. Yeah, you know.
The truth
why you
also
don't
is,
come? Yeah, why you don't come?
the truth also is that you cannot know what you have not been taught.
Absolutely.
And therefore we have to re-engineer how we understand a teaching or learning environment. I meet many young people who know more old-time Jamaican music than me.
That's true.
And I say, where you know it from? Them parents carry them go Java. And them just a drink it in. So that we have to create different kinds of learning environment. Because I think how come you not know that is accusatory.
So ashamed to tell you this story. I have a 14-year-old nephew, and I am on the Louise Bennett Foundation, and they had an event, and I took him with me. And I'm talking to Anya Gludon, and we're having a conversation, and he's hearing me, we're talking, and he said to me, "What is a pantomime?" A hickling picnic. I asked, what is a
Shame.
pantomime? He's lived abroad for a long time, right? He lived abroad
Bring
for
him
a while.
home for Christmas and summer.
Well, we are going to pantomime.
Yeah, that is a pantomime.
We are so going to pantomime this month. And we are so going to NDTC. And he is so going to learn that his grandfather was there for 15 years.
Yeah.
And what it means, what that means to him, and as an individual, but also collectively. My heart stopped for a moment, I must tell you.
And please stop for a moment so we can have the principal, Dorrit Campbell, make her intervention.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and thank you again, Debbie, for returning this morning with another lecture. Only this time it was a question and answer lecture. From last night, my itching ears wanted to trigger my brewing tongue, but Amina wouldn't let me. A lot of things just going around. Even when I woke up this morning from my usual morning dev, I was still thinking about some of these things. And bear with me a little, I want to go into Judges 2:10. There's a verse there which says, when the whole generation, after the whole generation of Joshua and Caleb and Moses had died out, there was a new generation who did not know their God or what he had done for Israel. And I think about that and this our new generation. I'm not even sure how far we reach now, but I'm absolutely sure we've passed the Xers to some Zoomers. I think that's where we are at, Zoomers.
Oi.
And another one coming up referred to as the Alphas. But yes, so those are the babies being born now. So I think about it and I'm like, what have we baby boomers done? Because we are the tail end of the baby boomers. And I heard what Amina said about if they don't see the value, they won't buy into it. And when she said that, I wrote, is it value or relevance? Because value systems change. And when value systems change, do we impose a value on persons with new value systems? Is that an old wine into new skins kind of paradigm? And then I have preservation is key. But are we talking when it really matters, where it really matters, how it really matters? Are they understanding us? So some of what Sophia alluded to, or well, she didn't allude, stated, are some of the concerns that I have been raising, not really trying to put you on the spot to find an answer, but just throwing them in the mix. And I want to go a little bit further
Hold
to
on, I could
say
take one at a time.
it's a part of this.
No,
it's
me
a
can't,
part of
me can't
it.
retain things too. So
You're getting old as I.
yes. So let me go with that because that's fascinating. It actually, and it links very closely to what Sophia was saying. And it links also into the notion of neoliberalism and recognizing that change and transformation is a process. And I think if we were able to share with the individuals, again, going back to that word, the meaning. So if we were to explain to them, and it has actually worked when I've done it, I said to them, you know, say, you can't help on yourself. And it's not on a fault. You all have lived through and are the products of 50 years of neoliberalism. And that's what this look like, right? So it look, and you can go back at the one geese further. We lived through the Cold War. So we were going through, we lived ideological battle. That's what we think, that's what we know. We know the tensions and we know the thought processes. They've lived neoliberalism. So it's for us to break it down and say, you know what that means? It means that this is how you think. And you don't even know it. Right? And the thought process, one generation before you thought like that. And this is why we have a disconnect. And the generation before that were battling to figure out who they were and why they were and whether they should even be. Right? And so there has been a progression of thought that has led us here. And it's not just about the Jamaican environment. There is a global conditioning that has caused it. And if we were to teach them that and say to them, think it through for yourself, yeah? Where we're going to with this, right? And not only where we're going to with it, but where are you taking it? Because I am clear that my position now is that I want to make these things clear to people, but I've done my due, right? My due is now in my advocacy. But in terms of the other sets of doing, is for them to do it. And I say to them, my job is to build an army. You guys are on the front line. You are. So it's really about, that is the answer to that question. It's not only about the didactic nature of saying to people, you must turn up. It's about hoping that they will engage with the notion of why they must turn up.
Yeah, the second part, Principal. Please continue.
Yeah, the second part has to do, well, link it to your accusation of so-called superpowers being schizophrenic. And
No. That we are schizophrenic in relation to the examples they put out in the world about how they describe or classify us according to their own agenda.
Well, so it ties in nicely in terms of what I wrote down. You call it schizophrenia. I talk about impersonating personas. And what am I concerned or angst about here is that the pattern of behavior and the trend I've seen across the eras and the genres, or if you want to say genres, is that if you want to really succeed as a creative, then you have to probably do like Jesus and only come for the poor and not for the not so poor or for the middle class. So you have to identify with them in every sense of the word, in the way you dress, the way you speak to, in the way you behave. So because Rastafarianism gurgled up out of our social, should I call it, depravity, then everybody has to become a Rastafarian in order to identify with that part of our way of life. And I have a problem with that. Why can't you be who you are and be what you are when you are who you are? Why is it that if you look like Debbie and want to remain Debbie but still be a successful artist, you are frowned upon? If you look like Elizabeth over there and want to be a serious artist, you can't be serious unless Elizabeth sound like me and dread up her hair like me and Debbie, and just start behaving like a different part of our culture, which is wonderful, but that's not who I am or who you are. In short, I am asking, why can't art be elitist? And why you have to dread to be a Rasta man? Why can't you be the artist you are and represent the group from which you come and still mobilize and identify with another group without changing your own personality or wanting to become schizophrenic? I'm playing with all those.
Okay, that's fascinating. So I'm going to start with the schizophrenia. Not a psychiatrist, but trust me.
It's in your blood.
Mental health and mental illness. Okay. Schizophrenia from a layman's perspective is dissonance in the ways in which we think, yeah? There's some form of dissonance, which means that there's a problem that exists. It's a chronic illness, yeah? So it means that, something is wrong. And I don't think there is very much of a difference between the terms that you use, because they both speak to a notion that a way of thinking is challenging.
Except that one is intentional and the other one is maladaptive.
Yes, absolutely. Now, this notion of why can't I be who I need to be is a matter of diversity, and it's something that the whole world is actually kind of working through at the moment, and the whole world is asking those questions, and that is what has actually put the cultural and creative industries back centrally into the discussion of what humanity is. And I think the world is moving in a direction that says definitively, absolutely, you can be who you, we should be establishing systems where people can be who they want to be. Now, we're going to be real this morning, right? There are cultural issues that exist within different places. I can't go to certain countries. Well, I couldn't do it here either, but for different reasons, and put on a bikini on the and go on the street or even the beach. Yeah. In our country, the whole issue of homosexuality in some spaces is infradig. Yeah. There are cultural responses to issues of diversity, and even countries are saying to other countries that you need to allow us our diversity so that we don't have to sign into your agreement that it says that we can't be diverse and have a diverse way of thinking. And it's complex. So on one hand, there needs to be rules and structure. On the other hand, people have rights, but those rights come with responsibilities.
The response of Kenya to the United States on issues of diversity.
Absolutely. These are all the issues that the whole world is grappling with. But I want us to, and those are discussions that, those discussions that you kind of never going to solve. They're always
a wicked problem.
Wicked problem. Yeah. But this is where the consciousness is necessary now. Where notions of diversity, and by virtue of diversity, notions of culture have become central to the thinking of global development. Do we understand what that means for us as global cultural agents? Do we understand that that's why we need to show up? And that's why we need to work together, because other people see it. We don't see it.
Capleton tell we that long time. That we not see ourselves, how them see we.
Right? And that's the very reason why principalities and powers exist, to ensure that we don't see it.
Absolutely. That Capleton say. Dr. Williams, Dean of the School of Music.
Thanks again for the lecture yesterday, Dr. Hickling Gordon, and certainly the lecture and interaction this morning, because all of what you're saying is, a lot of things keep coming in my mind, and I keep wondering, should I ask a question or make a comment? And let me see if it's a question or a comment by the time I'm done. I don't know. But it's something certainly to consider, because a lot of things that you're talking about is we're talking, and I'm coming from talking about young people now, because we're talking about who is here, who turned up, right? We talk about different things to do with culture, and whether it's the students' culture, or is it our culture that we're talking about, or the students' culture, or whose culture is it really? And I think at this point in time, I will go with the Stuart Hall definition of culture, which is experience lived, experience interpreted, experience defined. And those three things I think are very, very important in trying to understand where do these students, where are they placed in all of this, or where do they stand rather in all of this. And I guess my question is, you selected 3 women yesterday, and that was their experience, and I think the important aspect of listening to another facet of Louise Bennett, or listening to Lannerman and so on and so forth, is that it gives us an opportunity to understand something else about somebody, something about them that you didn't understand or didn't know, or just learning about somebody else, right? And I think for our young people, a lot of times we have to put things in place to let them learn about something else. So they're not going to necessarily know about why Devon House is there, unless we place it in something, or in the curriculum, or in our something that we post stuff all the time. They're not going to know about it until we help them to know about it. And so I'm hoping somehow we can reach, and it's not only young people alone. Some older folks don't know either.
Yeah.
Right?
It's interesting you say that. Yes, and we have to start talking in a language that is acceptable, and probably using examples that are relevant.
Or other situations.
Relevant to them. Relevant.
Or other situations.
So I was doing a UNESCO forum some time ago, and I used the example of coffee. It was about training and education, and I used the example of coffee, who had just won the Grammy, and I had indicated to them it was really a kind of getting them to understand that some of the constructs that they were creating about training are very different here because coffee, it would seem, is not a trained musician or performer in a school, but her father was a practicing performer. She lived the cultural and creative industries. She went to a high school that was very, very clearly ingrained in cultural and creative activity. And so maybe it's really about finding those people among them. Yeah, and actually kind of moving away from the language of them, yeah? Because how do you say that without saying they? They are still us. We are still us. Yeah, we are still us.
Absolutely, we're the ones we've been waiting for.
We are
according to
still
that
us.
African writer. Here is the thing, though. What markers are we leaving behind when we talk about whose culture it is? We live in the same space, and there are some things which are universal in the culture. Rice and peas on Sunday, the love of music. Put on, dress up and go, hold on Debbie, because I come into something. I'll come into two things, 2 points I'd like to make, and one of them is fairly long. So when we say we don't know whose culture it is, we are admitting a divide which might be more unreal than real. We have access to the same channels, the same radio station, the same music. Why do we keep talking about us and them in the way we talk about young and old? That's the first thing. And so in the Bible, I don't know about the Bible, but sometimes me quote the Bible, miss. For I think when Moses was leading his people to where he was leading them, the Lord instructed him to leave markers, so that those who come behind will ask, what does this mean? What markers are we leaving? What markers are we leaving? So they will know that this is relevant to all ages. I know them invent ackee and saltfish, hold on, but them love ackee and saltfish. I know them invent electricity, but them need electricity. I'm going to finish with this longer point now. There is a thin line between values and value systems, I think. I think if we were to check it out, we all value the same things. We want nice clothes to wear. We might not have the same definition. Come in now, put on our jeans will look like me and the dog catch a fight and the dog wins. But for some people, that's nice clothes. But right? But nice clothes is a value. We all have it. We want a house. That's a value. We want respect. That's a value. So when we and when we go to JCDC and them have them competition, they have their value system of how them going to mark us, and we no quarrel with it. But when we talk about how we want to live and build a society, we say, well, that value might not apply, right? We're afraid to talk about values in human relationships. 5 or 6 years ago, on Good Friday, somebody put on a fun day in a Hope Gardens. I was livid. I designed a questionnaire for my students to come to some understanding of why I was livid about that. Last year, I was interviewed by Nationwide, what's your name, Honeybee? About what I missed about Easter. Me miss all of the show them on TV about the crucifixion. That not say me love crucifixion. It says that I grew up with a notion that some days in the year are sacred. Are sacred. Me no know how we are draw a lot up on a Sunday. When that happened, me nearly drop down. Some days are sacred. And if we allow a whole generation after generation to transition without this notion of what, I don't care what you consider sacred, just as long as you understand that sacred is a value which does something to the human spirit and the human ability to create and seek something else that is sacred, named sovereignty and decolonization. And so I think it's a thin line between the value and the systems by which those values are pursued.
So I'm going to answer you this way. This morning I woke up, again thinking about last night. I also left here and went to the show up at the arena. Mm-hmm. And thinking about, just some issues that are in my mind about some of those things. And I woke up this morning and I said to the housekeeper, I said to her, having a thought, I need you to help me. I said, that scripture about neighbor, how it go? And she said to me, you mean the one in Matthew? This morning this happened. I said, I don't know where it is. I want to know what it is. She says, you mean the one about love your neighbor as yourself? You mean the one about what is a neighbor and who is a neighbor and where is a neighbor? And she went and she told me, I got a sermon this morning about love your neighbor as yourself. And I said, yeah, that one, because I want to write about it. And she told me where to find it and she told me what it was. And that's the answer to the question. Love thy neighbor as thyself. That has to be the ultimate value, and it have to start there so. And we have to go back there so, or go forward there so. Right? Go forward there so. And that is decolonization.
Absolutely. I hear the principal saying some neighbors, yeah, clap, right. Some neighbors are unlovable. We say these things, but that don't make it a value. That don't make it any less of a value. I remember when I lived in Antigua. At
that time you have to love them.
See there, I remember when I lived in Antigua, I was talking to a friend of mine about something. And I said, and this person has done something totally unforgivable. And I was sure of what I was saying. And she said, is there such a thing?
Aye.
So that forgiveness is a value.
Yeah.
There are some universal values.
Yeah.
That don't depend on who or what is in power,
yes.
The circumstances. There are some things that we aspire to. In the way you describe decolonization as a goal, something we aspire to. Ladies and gentlemen, we could go on forever, but the one Mr. Leighton Jones, the Vice Principal of Administration and Resource Development, decides say Sports Day is going to start at 11. And it is now at 11.
It's 11? Oh my gosh.
A solar wet fire now. And I'm not looking at him. It is now at 11. So under normal circumstances, I would close these discussions. But I want to ask one of my colleagues who has not spoken if they could just close us out. And when we do these activities, I like to think there is no closing remark. It's just a new beginning to something else. So everybody get ready, me I go pick on you. What I want to say further is that it name coffee, tea and something, don't it? Yeah. And we always serve coffee and tea, right? So today is coffee, tea and 2 fried dumpling. So you go get your coffee, tea over there, so you have your 2 fried dumpling. And we go over to Sports Day to watch Ashanti win the trophy. No disrespect to Krull and Warlord. I've left out somebody. And me Shaft, no. I Shaft, no. Let's start again. Shaft, Krull, Warlord, and Ashanti. And here is a great opportunity to show the value of sportsmanship and to turn.
balance in those games, though. We should level all of them.
Right, balance. Jesse, you have something to say?
Well, I was given the microphone,
Yes, use it.
so I will use it.
Yes.
I'm not sure which colleague you're referring to when you say you'll give a colleague a chance to.
Well, it's you.
Apparently.
Yeah.
It is I. So first and foremost, I want to give thanks for the gathering. Give thanks for Dr. Hickling Gordon. Give thanks for Auntie Amina. Who I know very well.
We've been colleagues since he was a baby.
Indeed. Deborah Hickling made mention of the firing of 100 and something JBC people, but maybe
285.
285.
180 something, I think.
180
Yes.
The whole, yeah.
My mother was a part of that. My mother was in that number, and there's a whole host of JBC babies that link and keep the link to
It's
this day.
complex.
Yeah, man, it's a deep, it's a very, very, very deep thing.
My father was one of them too.
Yeah, man.
The destruction of the aspiration to sovereignty.
Absolutely.
When people with the same thinking are scattered.
Yeah. And you see, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you.
Conversation
Oh
will
Lord.
No problem. So that is one of the things that kind of, I guess, lay a background to my kind of revolutionary underpinning. So through that, we learn about Michael Manley and socialism and the Cold War. I'm a 80s baby. But one of the things that I take away from this talk last night and today is the idea of balance. And when we speak of gender, it's not one gender. It's just gender, right? So it's a gendered conversation, and the gender is balance, right? So whether male, whether female, whether either, neither, or none.
Or none.
Either, neither, or both. Is a balance. I wanted to also talk a little bit about identity. I believe that it's a conundrum. I call it a conundrum, a complex one. But ultimately, if we start with love, that can take us where we need to get. The idea of overstanding, that's a value. Overstanding that your father speaks about, that's one of the values that I believe that we need to hold on to. And above all, empathy. Empathy. All of us need to be rooted and grounded in empathy. So the us and them thing, I hear it and you kind of call it out, and I felt it as well. As I said, John, how we keep saying them and they, and so the us and them thing is right. It's so entrenched because we same way. I am your child, as much as you are my mother. And the students that are a little younger than me, they could be my children, so your grandchildren. So are we same way?
The extension of liberty.
Yeah, man, are we same way? So we have to look into ourselves. I think we spoke about insight. We have to look into ourselves before we can kind of connect to those extents of ourselves. It's all us. It's oneness. It's one person.